For my first foray into the invertebrate world, I have decided to start with fairyflies. This family of insects have fascinated me ever since I first learned about them. They are a very common group of insects, although I am willing to bet that many of you have never heard of them. As usual, a document for the sources for the images used, along with research papers I found useful, will be included in the description of this video. So, what are fairyflies? Well, they are not flies, they are wasps, and so are sometimes also known as fairy wasps. Fairyfly does seem to be the more common name, despite its inaccuracy, so I will continue to refer to them as that throughout this video. As wasps, fairyflies are in the order Hymenoptera, a group of insects that includes sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants. Hymenoptera is the most basal or least related order in the clade that includes beetles, butterflies, flies, and fleas, among others. There are over 150,000 described species of Hymenoptera. One of the distinguishing features of this order is that their forewings and hindwings are connected to each other by a series of hook-like bristles. There is a lot of diversity within this order, so other features are difficult to narrow down. They have large, compound eyes, and most species also have three simple eyes, known as ocelli. Hymenoptera is divided into two suborders, although the phylogeny is a little more complicated than this. The sawflies are in Symphata. These are named for the saw-like appearance of their ovipositor. The ovipositor is usually the structure female insects use to lay eggs, but in many of the Hymenoptera this has been modified. In the case of sawflies, they use it to cut into plants where they can then lay their eggs. It is important to note that Symphata by itself is not a clade. You cannot have a clade containing all sawflies while excluding the other Hymenopterans. The other suborder is Apocrita. This is the so-called wasp waste insects, the wasps, bees, and ants. Insects in general are known for having three body parts, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. In the wasp waste insects, their abdomen is divided into two segments. The first is fused to their thorax, while the second is only connected to the rest of their body by a very narrow waist. This gives the insect increased mobility over their abdomen, and therefore increased control of their ovipositor. It is thought that this adaptation evolved to help parasitic insects to be more effective when laying their eggs. Despite most people being more familiar with the eusocial hymenopterans like the bees or ants that live in hives or colonies, many more are parasitic. In fact, the superfamily Ichneumonidae, one of the many superfamilies of parasitic wasp, contains the two largest families of hymenopterans. These two families alone contain a combined 60 to 70,000 species, although it is suspected that there are many more that have not yet been described to science. So, turning to the phylogeny, Ichneumonidae is actually in the first clade. It has three living families, and between them they are believed to have as many as 100,000 species. The superfamily most closely related to them is Seraphronidae. It is a much smaller group, with only two families and a total of around 800 species. They are poorly known, but they are believed to be parasitoids or hyperparasitoids. A hyperparasite is a parasite known for parasitizing other parasites, and so can actually be quite useful to control specific pests. The other branch of this clade has more superfamilies. Cynipoidea has 7 families, most of which are parasitoids or hyperparasitoids. However, the species most well known in the superfamily are actually the herbivorous ones. This is the family Cynipidae, more commonly known as the gall wasps. Next, we have the superfamily Platygastroidea. This contains about 4,000 species, all of which are exclusively parasitic. Historically, they have specialized in parasitizing insects in the order Orthoptera, which includes the grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. Some lineages have since evolved away from this and have moved to parasitizing different orders of insect. The Chalcid Wasps and Chalcidoidea are next. We will be returning to these shortly, as this is the superfamily that contains the fairyflies. It has around 22,500 described species, but the estimated total diversity of this superfamily is around 500,000, meaning that many of them have not been described. Most of them are parasites of other insects, but some have different life cycles, such as the herbivorous fig wasps. Next is Diprioidea, with 5 living families. Most of these families do not have many species, with the exception being Diprioidea, with 2,300 species. The other families have anywhere from 2 to 50 species. As you are likely coming to expect, these are also parasites, although mostly of flies. The last superfamily in this clade is Proctotripoidea. It has 7 families, most of which contain few species. They are parasites of insect larvae, most commonly beetles, although some species will target fly larvae as well. I am not going to go through all the lineages of the other clade of Apocrita, although it does include some fascinating families. There are many more parasitic wasps, similar to those we have been looking at. However, this clade also includes Vespoidea, the superfamily with the Vespid wasps. These are likely the first wasps you think of when thinking of wasps. Known for the bright yellow and black coloration of many species, they are extremely diverse, with different species being social, eusocial, or solitary, and being predators, scavengers, herbivores, or parasites. Also in this clade are the velvet ants, known for the wingless female's similarity to ants, and the spider wasps, which parasitize spiders. The velvet ants may be considered wasps, but the true ants are also in this clade in the superfamily Formicoidea. Skipping over the next few lineages of wasps, we finally come to the bees in Anthophila. This has over 20,000 species spread over 7 families. While most people are familiar with the honeybees and bumblebees, which are eusocial or social respectively, most other bees are actually solitary. These solitary bees make up over 90% of all known bee species. Okay, well that felt like far too fast to skip over some very interesting groups of insects, but they are not the focus of this video, so let's return to the Chalcid wasps and the fairyflies. So, we have already talked a little about the Chalcid wasps and the superfamily Chalcidoidea. It is a group that has undergone many changes to its phylogeny over the years, and will likely undergo more in the future. There are currently 53 families recognized in this superfamily, although 3 of those are prehistoric and so extinct. However, several of these families are known to be problematic wastebasket taxa. A wastebasket taxon is when a classification like family is used to group organisms together when it is unknown where else to put them. This results in a group that does not include all of the most closely related species. In the case of the Chalcid wasps, for example, the family Myrmaridae was recently split into 24 different families after a close examination of the included genera. Despite being known as the wastebasket taxon of the Chalcid wasps for decades, the actual research to split it apart only occurred very recently, being published in 2022, and more work still needs to be done to sort out the various families in Chalcidoidea. The state of the phylogeny of Chalcidoidea is worsened as convergent evolution is common within this superfamily. This means that families not closely related show similar characteristics due to environmental pressures and not necessarily due to evolutionary history. This made it very difficult to work out relationships of different taxa based on morphology, which is how phylogenies were traditionally created. Today, the tools provided by genetic testing makes these relationships much easier to work out, and so with these tools, this should become less of a problem in the future. Chalcid wasps are generally small, with the average length only being 1.5 mm and most species being less than 3 mm. There are some notable exceptions, however. Females of Dodophoenus wallacei can get up to 41 mm long, but at least half of this length is the ovipositor. Aside from their size, they do have a lot of diversity. Many species have fully developed wings, but in others the wings are reduced or completely absent. In the species that have wings, these often have reduced or even no veins in their wings. Some species show sexual dimorphism, and this is ignoring the enlarged ovipositor, which, as an egg-laying structure, is only found on females. For example, the fig wasps in the family Agonidae take this to the extremes. The females are dark in colour, have compound eyes, and can fly. They are actually important pollinators for many types of fig tree. The males, on the other hand, are pale in colour, have vestigial eyes, and are wingless. The males typically remain in the fig where they were born for their entire lives. With the exception of the fig wasps, most other Chalcid wasps are parasites. However, they still have a lot of diversity within the general umbrella of parasite. Some species are endoparasites, living inside their host, while others are ectoparasites, living outside their host. Different species of Chalcid wasps parasitize different stages of their hosts, from eggs to larvae to adults. Some are also hyperparasites, targeting other parasites. Some are very specific with which hosts are suitable for them, while others are more generalist parasites. Chalcid wasps are actually one of the most common parasites used as biological control agents. For example, wasps in the family Incertidae have been used to target oriental mealybugs. For biological control, species specializing in a single host is ideal, as there is no possibility of non-target species being affected. Some of the herbivorous Chalcid wasps have also been used for this, such as species in Myrmaridae, which have been used to control the long-leaved wattle, Acacia longifolia. This is a plant native to Australia but is invasive in South Africa. The wasps are also native to Australia, and so they were imported into South Africa and have been highly successful in controlling the weed. Okay, so where do the fairyflies fit in with the other Chalcid wasps? They are actually the most common of the Chalcid wasps, but are rarely noticed by humans due to their small size. In fact, their species include the smallest known insect and also the smallest flying insect. This is the reason they are named fairyflies. They are small and can be almost invisible, like the mythical fairies they are named after. Scientists have also had some fun with this common name, creating genera and species names based on well-known fairies. The most obvious of this is the genus Tinkerbella. Tinkerbell is the fairy first seen in J.M. Barrie's 1904 play, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up. Since then, she has appeared in various books and movies, including having a starring role in her own movie franchise. The only species in this genus is Tinkerbella nana, and its species name is a reference to Nana, the family dog owned by the children's parents in the Peter Pan stories. Fairyflies are in the family Myrmaridae. This family has around 100 different genera and over 1,400 different species identified. As with Chalcid wasps, there are likely many more species that have not yet been described to science, but this problem is likely worsened by the small size of fairyflies in particular. They are often strongly sexually dimorphic, with the males of many species being smaller and flightless. The females can fly, but also have extremely distinctive antennae that the males lack. Females' antennae end in a club-like segment, while males are typically thread-like. Their wings are very unusual, but also highly variable between species. Some have greatly reduced wings, while others have lost them completely. In those with wings, they are long and slender, but are also covered in large bristles, making them look extremely hairy. These unusual wings help them to fly despite their unusual appearance. They work in conjunction with the insect's small size to increase air resistance. For fairyflies, air has about the consistency that honey has for us. So flying is less of an issue of staying aloft, but more similar to swimming. Their unusual wings may be another reason that they were named after fairies, as entomologists have described their wings as looking very beautiful under a microscope. The females of most species can be distinguished from the males due to their club-like ends of their antennae. Where the male's antennae remain thread-like for their entire length, the females typically have an enlarged final section of their antennae, making it appear more like a club. Whether male or female, fairyflies have long antennae for their size, and this can be used to distinguish them from other similar groups of small parasitic wasp. Fairyflies are usually solitary. The ratio of males to females in each brood depends on the species, with some having roughly equal numbers, but in others there are many more females than males. These wasps are parasitic, and so lay their eggs in other insects' eggs. The males of most species never leave their host's eggs. This is why they have no wings and much less developed sight. They don't need these things to survive. Their only purpose is to mate with their sisters to fertilize their eggs before the females leave to find a suitable host for their own eggs. Adult fairyflies usually only live for a day or two, long enough to find another host for the female to lay their eggs, but not any longer. Females can lay a maximum of around 100 eggs. These eggs will hatch rapidly once laid, somewhere between 6 hours to 2 days later. This quick time is important for a parasitic species, as their larvae need to hatch before the host's young do, and the older the host embryos are, the harder they are for fairyflies to digest. Several generations can often be born in a year, and while these can often parasitize different hosts, sometimes the turnover between generations are so short that they can parasitize the same host. Species in the genus Polynema, for example, have been recorded producing 3 generations in a single brood of treehoppers. Despite their small size, fairyflies have proved very useful for humans. As parasites, many species are quite specific in the hosts that they parasitize. This means that they can be used as an agent for biological control. Biological control is when another animal is introduced to deal with problematic pests, in this case to protect human crops from problematic insects. There are several instances of this being successfully achieved. For example, the fairyfly species Gonatoceros ashmeadi and Gonatoceros troglodytes were introduced into California in 2000. This was done to try and combat the plague of glassy-winged sharpshooters, a large leafhopper that was infesting vineyards. This was extremely successful, with the introduction of the fairyflies causing the sharpshooter population to decrease by a staggering 90%. A slightly more complicated example is the introduction of the fairyfly Anagrus epos, also into California. Firstly, Anagrus epos is now thought to be a species complex, so there are likely multiple species that are given the same name, at least until researchers separate them out. Anyway, they were introduced to control grape leafhoppers. This failed at first, as the fairyflies died out over winter since there was no suitable hosts in the area. Once this was discovered, blackberry bushes were planted near the grapevines. This encouraged the blackberry leafhopper into the area, which gave the wasps a host for the winter, while allowing them to control the target grape leafhoppers during summer and spring. While both of these examples are from California, fairyflies have been successfully used in almost a dozen examples around the world. They have been successfully used to control different pests in Hawaii, Tahiti, and South Africa, to name a few, and their use has also been investigated in Australia and Israel as well. With over 100 known genera of fairyfly, I am obviously not going to be able to talk about all of them, but here are a small selection. Earlier, I called most Chalcid wasps small, but fairyflies take this to the extreme. They include the world's smallest known insect, the males of Dicopomorpha Hymenoptera. This species is one of those with sexual dimorphism, with the males being blind, wingless, and around 40% smaller than the females, with a minimum size of around 140 micrometers. Although on average they are a tad larger than that, they are even smaller than some single-celled organisms, such as certain species of amoeba and bacteria. For a comparison, human hair is about 100 micrometers wide, so these insects are only a little longer than your hair is wide. The life cycle of this tiny insect is fascinating. They are difficult to research since their minuscule size makes them hard to find and easy to overlook. However, from what we understand, this species is parasitic, using eggs of other species as nurseries for their young. Each host egg will typically contain one female and one male of Dicopomorpha, although occasionally there may be multiple males. The adult male will mate with their sister inside the host's egg and then die without ever leaving the egg. The female is then already pregnant when she leaves the host egg, ready to find another host in which to lay her own eggs. Fairyflies do not only include the smallest known insect, but also the smallest flying insect. Kikiki is the only species in its genus, and it is only 150 micrometers long. Its names both come from Hawaiian, with the researchers stating that they are different words both meaning tiny bit. I did have a quick look on Google Translate, and it gave me the meaning of hidden cricket, which I guess is also apt if we ignore the fact that they are wasps, not crickets. But I am more inclined to believe the researchers given the famous unreliability of Google Translate. Kikiki was first discovered in Hawaii around the year 2000. They have since also been found in Costa Rica and Trinidad, so are much more widespread than was initially believed. Given their small size, it would not be surprising to find that they have an even larger range than this, although they have yet to be found in other countries. I mentioned the previous two genera as they were notable for their status as the smallest known insects. Gonatoceros gets a mention, however, due to an unusual adaptation not known in other genera. This genus has about 260 known species, and many of these species are useful as biological control agents, as I described earlier. Their life cycle is very similar to that I described earlier, but their unusual adaptation does give them another option if the female is having trouble finding a suitable host in which to lay her eggs. Most fairyflies need to find this host quickly, as they die after a few days. While this is also true for Gonatoceros, if they are having trouble finding a host, then the female can reabsorb some of her eggs back into her body. This lets her reclaim their nutrients and therefore extends her lifespan by a few more days, giving her more time to find a suitable host. Anagrus is another genus of fairyflies, which has many species useful for biological control. This genus is particularly interesting, as several species within it are able to use parthenogenesis to reproduce. Parthenogenesis is a process that allows some animals to create a viable embryo in an unfertilized egg. This means that the females can reproduce without needing a male. It is unknown if this is common throughout the genus, but at least 4 different species in Anagrus have been recorded using parthenogenesis. At least one species of fairyfly in another genus is also able to do this, so it is not exclusive to Anagrus, but it does appear to be more common in this genus. Of course, given how little is known about the life history of fairyflies, it would not be surprising to find that this is more widespread than is currently thought. There are several types of parthenogenesis. The one used by these fairyflies is known as facultative parthenogenesis. This is actually quite a rare form of parthenogenesis, and it basically means that the species can choose whether to reproduce normally, that is with the male fertilizing the female's eggs, or via parthenogenesis without the male's input. They will usually only choose parthenogenesis when a male is not present. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Fairyflies are tiny insects that are little known to most people. They have a fascinating life cycle and have proven extremely useful as biological control agents. Thank you for listening, and feel free to suggest another group of animals you want to see me cover in the comments below.